Afternoon, Tim. How you
Hello.
doing?
Yeah, I'm good, Shabbar. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very well. It's a bit wet
Mm,
and windy today,
mm.
yeah, I'm hoping that this sort of conversation is going to cheer me up a bit because I'm
Oh,
feeling a little bit down with all of the damp weather outside. But
mm,
we um we had our conversation last week about this idea of money and freedom, and yeah, urge people to go back and listen to that because that's sort of like part one of this conversation on money and freedom. And we got to this point where I started to talk about how in my line of work, there's a real emphasis and focus on financial freedom and this idea that, helping clients reach a place where they've built up enough assets to be able to uh, have the option of stopping work completely or scaling back the amount that they work, and the only way that they can do this is through having built up money in various pots, usually a pension, which are just geared towards providing them now with an income in retirement so that they can maintain their lifestyle without sort of the fear of running out of money. And that's threw up a few questions that you had, and we said, yeah, let's go there for the next episode. So here we are now focusing on this idea of work, money, freedom, and how does this all tie together? And I guess I've got a few questions around, this pursuit of financial freedom in retirement, and the role that I play within that, but also, the mindset of the individual who's sort of working towards this goal, if we put it as a goal. And yeah, I'm not sure whether I've got this 100% right, and I'm interested to talk it through with you.
mm. Great. Yeah, I'm making lots of notes. Okay, so it's kind of part two, right?
Mm,
And we didn't know there would be a part two when we started. So my memory last week was about, yeah, freedom, financial freedom, and then what can we do with freedom? And as a brief recap, although I agree, I think it'd be good if people would listen to part one first. We ended up talking about two entanglements or projections, two kind of confusions we can have around money and money numbers. The first one was time. If I have enough money, then I can do what I like with my time. And you were talking about, I can't remember if it was a client or someone you'd come across who had so much money they didn't feel at all free because they had to do certain things and live in certain countries to avoid tax. And it was just an example. But the point is, the idea that money gives us time, we really need to investigate. So we talked about that last week. And often we feel our time is most our own, maybe when we're young, we have no money and no assets or whatever. And then we talked about the illusion of agency. So with money, I'm free to do what I like. And again, we talked about people with lots of money. They definitely get nicer hotels and nicer suits and, to go first class, but they don't necessarily feel free in their lives to do really what they like. Many examples of that, and many examples. I've worked with people with generational wealth or children of very high net worth, people who have more money they can imagine, but they really don't feel free. They often feel very burdened and very kind of trapped actually by roles, responsibilities, even with how they handle money. So we looked at that last time. And again, I want to kind of offer a few caveats. We're not saying that you can't feel free with money. We're not saying money's bad and you feel more free without money. Clearly, all things being equal, if you have money, that's great. You can do all sorts of stuff. But what we're saying is the experience of I'm free with my time, I'm free with my life, I can choose to go this way or that way. What we're saying is that's a human experience that we get to have, and it's really not related to money. So there are people with oodles of money who do feel free, and there are people with oodles of money who just don't. They feel burdened, pressured, trapped, limited, stuck, too busy. And similarly, there are people with very little money who may feel either of those, right? So that's kind of what we got to. I think it's probably worth us saying for today as well, maybe it's good to make a distinction. We're not against people saving for their future. right? Otherwise you'd be out of a job and, you know, people would think we were crazy. There's nothing certainly in what I'm going to say that says, again, all things being equal, if you have some surplus money or extra money and you're using your time and your money now to live a good life, well, then, of course, put some away, save it. That's a good thing. So on balance, is better that you have money in the future, right? So we're not being, again, stupid or doing you out of a job.
Yeah, that sounds, and I think it's important to caveat this because
Yes.
you know, this podcast isn't about being evangelical about
No.
all of this stuff, but it's about being practical and bringing an awareness. And I think that's what I'm trying to bring into my role, and I'm being the partner to someone who's on this journey to whatever their goals are, and I'm a partner, a guide who's helping them along that way to crunch the numbers and do all of the stuff that could be quite technical, but at the same time it's bringing this sort of life component into it, which I think gets very lost in the work that we do. And I see it all the time. So I'm just fascinated to see, how do we bring this awareness to saving, investing, and sometimes it does require, you know, sacrificing today in order for you to have tomorrow, which is I think where it starts to
It's where it starts to get edgy. Question is, what am I sacrificing and why am I sacrificing it? So we'll dive into that, or maybe we'll come back to it. I think if I do a fast forward, I think it's fine to sacrifice money and stick it away. I'm not sure I could ever say sacrifice life now for the promise of life or freedom in the future. And so I think, you know, in our conversations and in this work, we're encouraging people always to notice in their own lives a distinction between my numbers and my money and then my actual experience of life. And through us, those are often very separate. And to experience life in a really rich, vital way doesn't necessarily need money, like your example of having a wonderful time walking along the Thames with your wife, right? But all too often, because of modern ideas about work and what it means, and also retirement and what it means, the trap would be, and maybe the thing for you to notice with your clients is, it's fine to say, actually, I'm going to buy a less expensive car and I'll put the excess into a pension pot because I don't really care about expensive car. I don't mind. Or actually, you know, I know I can have a really lovely, great holiday with my family in such and such a place. I don't have to have a 5-star tropical holiday, right? Not against those, but because I really know we can have life and enjoyment and connection, fine. And then if I save money, but I still get life, put the money into a pot if you've got nothing better to do with it, or give it to someone, or invest it in yourself, or use it for life. But if I have the mentality, I'm going to carry on doing a job that makes me mildly depressed, I'm not enjoying my working life, for example, but I'm going to tell myself that's the sacrifice I'm going to make because in 20 years, I'm going to get to be free in my retirement. What I would say is you're sacrificing life for some future idea wrapped up with money. I would say that's never a good idea.
Yeah, I like that. Sacrificing life for life in 20 years. So we talk about delayed gratification, but we're actually, you know, we could be talking about delayed life. Yeah, exactly. Delaying living now, you know, for living in the future. And like, who's to say that we're going to record a podcast next week? You know, there's no guarantee for anyone. And there is this balance and trade-off in the work that we do with, you know, you only live once kind of mentality, and you squirrel everything away but for a future, and really, really careful and meticulous about planning for your retirement. And there's going to be a story around why you're doing that as well. But yeah, so where do we go with this conversation?
Well, yeah, I'll pick up a few things in what you said. Again, if I was going to be really clever and meticulous about anything, I would want my clients to be meticulous about how alive do I feel now. Now, that the key here, because people might freak out, is, as you and I have discussed in many ways, we don't necessarily need loads of money to feel alive. So we're not saying spend all your money now, although some people the money may flow now rather than to support the future. But it's like, I think where we start is this idea of projection that we've talked about. The biggest problem with I want to be financially free in the future is it carries a future projection, right? It's not that all things being equal, it might not be sensible to have money in the future if you can. But what's the projection? What's the unconscious psychology going on there that can make it a trap? And what I would say is something like this. In my life now, I don't feel free, or my life now isn't fun, or my life now doesn't include much of what I really like. I feel like I'm on the treadmill, or I'm grinding away, or I'm slightly depressed, or it doesn't really have meaning, or even simply, right now, I don't get to do what I want, right? And they're all present experiences. They're all things in my life now. And what I want now, if I can, is I want to feel alive. I want to be aligned with meaning. I want to connect with whatever feels really kind of joyful or good or meaningful or significant, whatever that is, right? And the psychological projection that gets wrapped up with retirement, and we'll talk about anxiety in a bit, is instead of really examining with detail my life now and how it is I'm a grown up who's somehow decided that for 10, 20, 30 years, I'm not even going to think about really doing what I want with my life. I'm going to invest it into a number that grows with the promise, like a dangly carrot, that in the future, then I'll be free. Then I don't have to do all this horrible stuff. Now, the first thing, before we make a judgment about that, because it seems so sensible and it's what so many of us do and society applauds us for it, so it might seem very naughty of me to say it. So that's why before we talk about numbers and the cost of care in old age, let's just recognize psychologically, I'm making a future projection. At some point out there, I will get, bracket, because of my careful money and saving, to experience all the things that I want that I don't have now. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And this is quite common in terms of working hard, sacrificing now and putting a lot on hold.
On hold.
Yeah. And we hear that a lot, that, these are my accumulating years. I'm gonna graft and build my business, or, work hard and, get my bonuses and this, that, and the other, because then once I've amassed enough, I then won't need to do this anymore, and I'll be free to do whatever I want.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of like chain or like noose around what you're able to experience now. And it's like, right, that's the sacrifice, do this now, because then I'll be free. And especially maybe people that do very well financially at an early age and then feel like they'll be free. And I think you mentioned it last week, people that maybe do have enough money, as in a number, to sustain a lifestyle for the rest of their life, yet there's still something missing when they get to that number. So that makes me question exactly what you're talking about, this idea of this projection of it's all going to be okay
in the future.
In the future when I get the number.
It's really interesting. Two related ideas, not to do with money, but I think very relevant. I was actually listening to a podcast today about the rise of kind of Nazi Germany. And they said one of the things about the rise of politics in Nazi Germany, and in all, they would say kind of, what would you say, authoritarian, fascist, populist leaders, is they create a future projection. We're going to be great again. In the future, it's all going to be. And I realize politicians need to do that, and then we go too far into politics. But the point is, humans are very susceptible to the power of a positive future projection. In the future, it's going to be great. That's the Holy Land, the Holy Grail. We can be very manipulated by that to not look at what's going on now. And we do that to ourselves, right? And then just another example, I'm on a little coaching course now, just to kind of start your year coaching course, which is fun. And today's podcast, you get these 5-minute little podcasts. And the one I listened to today was called Someday is Just an Idea. Someday is just an idea. None of this means we don't need to, at times, consider the future. The problem is the idea of being caught by someday I'll have all of this stuff, or one day the country will be great again. Psychologically, if we're not careful, it focuses our attention away from our actual lived experience now. And so all we're saying is, if my lived experience is I don't like my work, I'm ground down, I'm not now doing the things I really feel I'm here to do, that's the trap. Because A, as you say, you might not make it to retirement. That's just true. B, even if you do, it's 10, 20, 30 years, and who knows how you'll be or whether you'll be able to do those things. C, why would you live voluntarily a life of not doing really what you like? Or at least why wouldn't you really investigate it? Of course, you know, we have families, we make compromises, we're in relationships. This isn't about being kind of egocentrically selfish, but I just think our society, for various reasons, collectively, we're very bought into the society's getting better, progress, in the future it will be better. And this is also wrapped up with some philosophical and religious ideas. Suffer now for the promise of the future. If you look at a lot of kind of traditional religions, there's a bit of that going on. Suffer now, and in the future, all will be good. And if we're not careful, I would argue, the modern industrial money work paradigm carries some of that story. Struggle and suffer now, and in the future, when the number is big enough, that's when you'll get to feel free. And I think what I'm saying is, psychologically, I don't think that leads to a happy, healthy life for people.
Yeah, and I'm starting to sort of, just in this conversation, I'm starting to see it more for what it actually is rather than the projection. And the actual problem that I'm trying to solve for my clients is a practical one, whereby as we're living longer than we have previously, the fact is that you're going to reach an age, and this is, I think I'm generalizing, but you're going to reach an age in your sort of 60s and 70s where maybe you're not going to have the strength or the ability, the mobility maybe, to carry on working as much as you were earlier on. And therefore, the practical necessity dictates that you're going to need to have stockpiled a little bit of money in order to support you when your ability to earn might be diminished. I mean, I'm sort of viewing it more now in a very practical, as opposed to I'm going to be free or I'm going to get to do the things.
Right. So that's a different step, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm starting to see, well, actually, yeah, it's not, there isn't, I get to do all my bucket list stuff when I reach this number. That's going to be the pinnacle of my existence, because now I'm going to have all of the time, because I don't have to work and I'm not chained to the office and all of this sort of stuff. But it's just, it's more of a practical, no, we're going to need to stockpile and be sensible now, just to, I'm going to use the word safeguard against what's inevitable, that we're probably not going to earn as much or be able to.
True.
Yeah. And actually just framing it like that takes away quite a lot of this emotional kind of everything right. Good's going to happen in the future.
Right. It becomes more realistic. So one of the things we find when we kind of dissolve a projection or reclaim a projection, you know, to give an example, we fall in love with someone in a certain way, like early, and they may be great and it may be wonderful, but there's a lot of projection going on, right? And that's a different podcast.
Yeah.
But then at some point the projection dissolves and we start to go, oh yeah, they're not the fairy tale princess. They may be great, but you know, they got flaws, they got blind spots, things irritate me. And then that's often a really important time in a relationship. Often the relationship ends. But the more mature thing is go, okay, well, yeah, I was caught up in some fantasy. That's collapsed a bit now, and then maybe there's some disappointment. But actually now we can get on with the real business of being two humans actually in a relationship. Before I was in a relationship with a Disney princess or, you know, whoever. Now we can do the real work. So just like, yeah, in the future, nothing wrong with making some considerations.
Yeah.
That's a different conversation, because we were talking about, you know, the fantasy of the future. So let's talk about both. let's talk about the reality of retirement, and then we maybe go back to the fantasy. Peter Koenig, who was the founder of this work, says something really interesting, you see, because one of the things we need to realize is the idea of retirement is also quite a modern idea. You know, only an industrial society, an industrial capitalist society with all of our ideas of kind of quite individualistic and quite nuclear family, that's when you get the idea of a retirement. It's a bit like holidays, actually. So all of these things that we think, well, you have to have that, and of course you do. And it's quite useful to realize maybe they're only a couple of 100 years old or less retirement.
Yeah, less.
What did we do? What did we do before then? Well, you know, if we lived in communities, we got old, we didn't retire, but we became elders. And yeah, it was recognized we could do less, but maybe we were looking after young children, but we were more. So there's a whole fabric of kind of social relations that would naturally support people with what they need through different ages, right? Now we feel very individual and we're separated from our wider family and society is a bit fragmented. So it is more scary. So I acknowledge that. But it's still quite interesting to think, what do I really need in, let's call it retirement, for a good life? What do I really need? When I'm not caught up in fear, because you said without the fear of running out of money. So just like we can have the hope in a future projection, oh, when I'm 60 and I've squirreled away, then I'll get to have that. So that's a kind of a hope-filled projection. We can also have a fear kind of filled projection. I'll be all alone, it will all be terrible, no one will be looking after me, etc. So what do we really need in retirement, right? First question is, do I actually know? Because if I'm not in touch with what I really need for a good life now, and I'm spending my life doing stuff that makes me miserable now, who the hell do I think I am that I really know what I'm going to need in 10, 20, 30 years? Right? Yeah. There's no evidence I'm in touch with my needs and fulfilling them now. The second thing is, if I'm not caught up in hope and fear, what do I really need? Well, what Peter Koenig says, which I think is really interesting, he says, the three most important things when you retire, and therefore the things you should be really developing now and using your money to develop, are your mental health or psychological emotional well-being. So develop yourself as a person, sort out your own kind of, because if you have a kind of positive whole view of yourself, that's good. And if you don't have your mental health, you know, all the money in the world, it's not going to make a happy retirement. So sort out your mental well-being, your physical health. So exercise, don't get stressed, don't give yourself a heart attack, don't have unhealthy habits that make you, you know, at risk of all diseases, and invest in your relationships, community, social relationships. And his view is, if you can reach an older age and in yourself you feel good and balanced and well, and your physical body's in good condition, and you have a good fabric of supportive and mutually beneficial relationships, that's what you're really going to need for a good retirement. It's quite interesting.
So interesting. And whilst you were saying that, there's this, digress a bit, but it's still connected. I love watching this program called Race Across the World, where they have these, you know, pairs that, you know, start in one location. Yeah. So, and the last one, I think they were traveling across South America. And obviously off the beaten track, you know, they go and stay with families and sort of smaller communities that aren't what I would call part of the, I don't know, the industrial sort of world that we live in, because they're still, you know, doing everything manually, a lot by hand. They probably don't even have Wi-Fi where, you know, and there were these old elders who were still like plowing the fields and still like, you know, the paddy, the rice fields, and there were the elders that were still making like jam and selling it in the market and stuff like that.
Exactly.
And you could see that they were genuinely, they were happy. There was a contentment that you could see that, yes, they were old and they were slightly, you know, slightly frail, but I mean, in their 80s, they're still working and doing, they're not redundant. They're an integral part of the community because they still they're still adding value. Whatever the sort of the financial situation is, I don't know, but there clearly is something very beautiful going on in that kind of an environment, which makes you think that, yeah, those sorts of people probably weren't sort of too worried about squirreling away money into a
No,
pension.
it doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
You're part of your community. And I'm just going to take you up on one phrase, which I
yeah,
know you didn't mean, when you said they were still adding value. The idea that when we're old or at any point,
yeah,
certain people add value or certain people don't add value is such an industrial,
yeah,
money-centered phrase, right?
yeah,
Now, if we take a life-centered lens, we would say, well, we're here, we're born, children don't add value, but they get looked after and they have a
yeah,
really important role and they bring great delight, but they're not really adding economic value. But the point is, at every stage of life, if we choose not to look at everything through a kind of economic financial lens,
yeah,
which only really are the last couple of 100 years society's been crazy enough to do,
yeah,
every stage of life needs to receive certain things and naturally give certain things and is in relationship with the wider society. And in the end, that's what we need. Now, there is a problem that collectively we've gone down this very individual industrial route, and that does make people more anxious about their future, of course, because if I feel very alone and I'm not with my extended family. But I think, again, to notice that the anxiety, yes, maybe a little bit rooted in reality, but the question of, if I invest now in my own well-being, physical, psychological, spiritual, and my relationships, then I'm much more likely to have a life like those 80-year-olds kind of picking rice and stuff, because I'm embedded and some of it will be paid and some won't. And even if I don't have much money, again, I don't want to underestimate the impact. But if I have lots of relationships and friendships, there's all sorts of ways that what I really need can be looked after. And just to use a couple of other examples, I've often had people in the money workshop come who say things like, well, I don't have a partner or I don't have children, and so it's even more important that I have money to look after myself. And I understand that. But, really what we could be working on in our lives now is, if we don't have partners and children, or even if we do, what's my web of relationships? Who am I connected to? This is really important. And so, that I would say it's too narrow and simplistic to say, well, I'm going to sacrifice all that stuff now. I'm not going to invest in my friendships. I don't have time to get healthy. I'm going to work every hour, or whatever it is. And then what are we doing? We're creating physical ill health. We're creating psychological, stress and problems. I'm not investing in my community, my friendships. But yeah, my numbers going up, and I think that's what's going to protect me in my old age. I'm not sure that's correct.
yeah. I think, again, looking at it through the lens of practically, what am I going to need? And looking at it more holistically through the relationships, and how am I going to be in the world, at that age, and
Right.
what's, and like you said, like, it's the support structure, it's the network, it's everything that you've got around you. But the problem is that in this day and age, we're so detached from that it's almost
Yeah.
like you've got no other option but to default to the I need more money. I think it's quite a difficult. I've got a few clients, for example, who don't have children, and I could definitely see the difference between, let's say, my parents, who rely on me quite sort of heavily to do certain things, especially with the technology moving so quickly, and the fact that they don't feel as comfortable doing their internet banking and applying for this and applying for that and all of that sort of stuff. So it's like there is a safety that comes with having, you know, children, which I don't think we could sort of get away from just from a support structure.
Well, again, I'm not disagreeing, but then do I know where my children will be living in
Yeah,
20 years? Do I
that's
know what
true.
my relationships will be like with my children in 20 years? Do I know that they'll still be here in 20 years?
Yeah,
Of course, all things being equal, it would be nice to have children live nearby who are supportive, of course, but there's no guarantees. And I was just thinking when you were saying that, if I had the choice, would I rather be in, I'm not sure, a really nice private care home when I'm old with lovely food, lovely atmosphere, but, no friends and slightly depressed and quite sick? Or would I rather be, not getting great kind of care, but healthy, positive, and engaged with my community? Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. Again, we're not saying don't save. We're not saying all things being equal, money won't be helpful. We're not that stupid. But to come back to your sacrifice, and then there was one more step I'd love to kind of offer. Am I sacrificing well-being, a good life now, richness now, relationships now? Am I sacrificing all the things I think I want in the future? I'm sacrificing them now for the future. And am I training myself now to not be in touch with my needs, not live a good, rich, healthy life? Because then suddenly I think, what, someone's going to flick a switch and I'll be in touch with all of that stuff in 20 years. I'm not sure it makes sense. Yeah. We can train ourselves to be very out of touch and not very well and not very connected, all in the name of, oh, well, I'm doing this, for some great future goal.
Yeah. I think you're right. And it does require a balance. Yes. Definitely. I like the fact that, yes, we're not being oblivious to the fact that, look, you do need a certain amount of money to be able to sustain yourself, in the world, whether you have people around you or you don't. But yeah, you could have mountains of cash and just be isolated and alone.
You're very unhappy. And, it is tricky, this stuff. Maybe that's a whole podcast we'll do another time. Because what we're talking today is this shift between, individual choices and the fact we are in a collective field. We are in a society. And unfortunately, much of how society does things like money and elders and old people is crazy and doesn't work for anyone. So it's hard because you look at it and go, well, that's crazy. It doesn't make sense. So I have to look after myself. What I would say is every time any individual makes a step where they really try and maximize life now and develops as much confidence they can that somehow it will be okay in the future, that actually helps the collective conversation develop. But it is difficult because we've been trained to think, I'm an individual, money's the thing that will secure me. So it's not easy to make these shifts. I wanted to say one more thing, which maybe is kind of where we can end. I wanted to say a bit about work. And you said early on in this conversation, you said something like, a lot of people are trying to pursue a figure for retirement. And I thought the key here, what's the difference between pursuing something and preparing? Because to me, if I'm pursuing a figure, it's almost like, again, there's some slightly neurotic or anxiety or hope-filled thing that in the future is when I get, the fun, the freedom, everything I want, and then I sacrifice life now. The opposite is, well, let me focus on my life now. Am I doing good work? And if I'm not, maybe I use some money to retrain or take that risk. Or, am I finding time for my well-being, my health, my relationships? Focus on it now. But then insofar as I'm doing that, of course, I can still prepare for life transitions. I'm going to get older. If I am living a life more or less or doing a job that is meaningful and is aligned with what I want to do, and money comes in, sure, use some of that money to prepare for the future. So the difference is, am I pursuing it like it's like I'm a greyhound around the track with the rabbit?
Yeah, with your financial.
Am I focused on my life now and it's meaningful and rich? And of course, then I'll use some resources if I have them to prepare.
Yeah. And when you said pursue and you've got your financial planner in the corner who's sort of metaphorically beating you with a stick saying invest more, save more, because you're gonna you don't want to run out of money, you don't want to run and I'm being a bit flippant because in the work that I do, and I know many of my colleagues have a real emphasis on sort of life-centered financial planning, which is bringing life into focus, which is great. And I think this is the dilemma that we face because we're so sometimes caught up in the head with the number. And like we were saying, that yes, the number is important and we're not being oblivious to that fact that there is a number that will mathematically ensure that, you know, you can afford a certain amount of lifestyle for a number of years. But it's like, yeah, let's prepare for that, and be open to the fact that different things will change along the way, and you might need different things along the way, and that's not the be all and end all.
Exactly. We're not caught. We know unless I die, the future's going to come, but we're not making it the be all and end all. And, you know, some questions, if I was a life-centered advisor, I might be saying things like, well, are you paying as much detailed attention to your life now and making sure the resources you have, including your time and your health and your money, are really giving you really what you want now, and to pay as much attention to that as you do to the future? That might be a great question. Another one might be, is the way you're generating money for your future bringing you life now? And if it is, you know, there's plenty of people who do jobs that they really love, you know, and they would be doing anyway, or that gives them a great meaning or significance or fun. Well, great. And then use that money for whatever, now or in the future. But if now you're doing stuff that really wears you down and makes you miserable for the future, as an advisor, I might say, well, is there any way to use some of your assets now to help you reposition yourself? Because otherwise you're going to have a miserable next 20 years. It's a wider conversation, and I don't even know if you're allowed to, but that would be a more life-centered reflection.
Yeah, I think that's a brave conversation that needs to be had. And again, I don't know how many people love what they do, or do you necessarily have to love what you do?
No, well, and that's a whole other question.
Yeah.
And actually, what we haven't talked about today is the idea of work. So I think that's a future podcast. We can talk about work and money. So it's a great question. Do you have to love it? Well, all I'd say is, if I'm putting up with something now that really doesn't bring me life in any way, and I'm struggling and suffering from it because I think I'm sacrificing something for the future, be careful. Whether you have to love every day, different question.
I think that motivation for why you're in that particular line of work, and if it's just because of the ability to put money away for the future, if that's like the sole purpose of you're putting up with this high paying job just because it's going to give you what you're projecting into the future, then yeah, that, you know, that would definitely be something to question. But yeah, I think we're not naive enough to think that, you know, people go to work and maybe are in jobs that they don't quite enjoy. Like you said, don't enjoy it every day, but it's still giving them enough of what they need now, and means now and for the future, because it would be ideal if we all just completely loved what we did, but that's not the reality. But
it's not at the moment. Maybe I think this is another conversation. We could really look at work and money, and that would be a really interesting conversation. But coming back to your elder,
yes,
who's picking rice in the paddy field,
yeah,
if whatever I do provides sufficient meaning and richness and connection and makes sense and is contributing, I don't need the idea of retirement, because why would I stop doing that?
Yeah.
I mean, I might do it a bit less as I get older and my back gets achy. But if what I do feels to me and others like a good contribution and puts me in a role and set of relationships that are good, I might not love picking rice, but I might feel quite rich and wholesome picking rice. And why do I suddenly stop doing that at 75? I wouldn't. I'd just get older. So, of course, that's hard in industrial society.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth us thinking these things and reflecting on them.
Yeah,
and I'm aware of our time now.
And just to say that there are numerous studies that have been done on people that reach retirement, and the diminishing cognitive ability that they have if they don't have some sort of meaning or purpose, something to get up for. And so this idea of retirement beach, you know, just having the money to do what you want when you want kind of thing, actually is kind of detrimental if you don't have meaning and purpose in your life, because that seems to be one of the fundamentals to longevity.
I mean, this is a whole whole area. It's really
Yeah.
important. And again, if I haven't been finding my meaning and purpose to some degree in my life before retirement, whether that's through work or through other things, the idea I'm suddenly going to find it when I stop working is a bit weird. So again, build those things in now with the time, and use your money if necessary to bring more of that into your life now, because you'll be building things that will serve you later on.
Lovely.
Next time.
As always, Tim, it's been brilliant. I'll speak to you next time.
Cheers, Shabba. See you next week.